Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. I am so sorry y'all have to wait until the end of the day for the show, but sometimes you gotta save the best for last, right? Here's what we got for y'all on today's show. You know this show is all about deep dives, and this week we're taking a look at the country's housing issues in a series we call Locked Out. In part one, we broke down the history and impact of zoning laws. Now that we've covered that ground, we're turning to another challenge Americans face when trying to find a place called home. There's no question that housing in the US is expensive. That's true just about everywhere across the country, but especially in major cities. For a lot of folks, living in those cities is only possible through affordable housing programs. Often that involves homes that are made available at a reduced cost for low-income folks through public or private programs. But there's a problem with this system. Actually, a couple of problems. For one, there aren't enough of these affordable housing units out there. And second, investigations, including our own reporting, show that some of these units aren't actually being offered for a lower cost, even when federal agencies say they should be. To put the need for affordable housing in perspective, let's talk about the need for housing among the lowest income Americans. Households making below 30% of the median income are considered extremely low income by the federal government. So, to give you an example, in Houston, one of those households on average would bring in $26,500 a year. Now, the Department of Housing and Urban Development says no one should spend more than 30% of their income on housing, but it doesn't always work out that way, does it? In reality, the lowest income renters spend about 70% of their income on rent, which leaves very little for clothes, food, and whatever else they need to live. So with the majority of their income going to rent, it can make it hard to stay afloat. Each year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition conducts a report estimating the affordable housing needs for the US. Their 2021 report used census data from 2019 since it was difficult for the Census Bureau to follow up with households during the pandemic.
Really what the report shows is that this, lack of rental affordability and millions of renters struggling to pay their rent was a significant problem for a lot of renters even before the pandemic. And then what we've seen during the pandemic is that problem get even worse.
Their report says no state has enough affordable and available homes for extremely low-income renters, leading to a shortage of 7 million homes nationwide. A recent Harvard University study found that between 2012 and 2017, rentals in the US that were $1,000 a month or more increased by 5 million. Meanwhile, low-cost units under $600 fell by 3.1 million. Let's take a look at how this is playing out across the country. In Nevada, California, Oregon, Arizona, and Florida, about 75% of extremely low-income renters are left without affordable housing. Meanwhile, Wyoming, Mississippi, West Virginia, Alabama, and South Dakota are some of the states with the highest amount of affordable housing available. But even 40% of extremely low-income renters in those states couldn't find a home in their budget.
And higher income households occupy a significant portion of that low-cost housing. And so millions of units that technically would be affordable to extremely low-income renters is not available to them because other households with higher incomes are occupying it. And so that's the difference between affordable units and units that are actually affordable and available.
There are different types of housing programs, both public and privately funded. But even if you qualify, the shortage of available affordable housing means you could spend years on a wait list. Ultimately, only 1 out of 4 low-income households that qualify for federal affordable housing programs actually end up with affordable housing.
The reality is we don't put enough financial resources into our affordable rental housing programs to adequately serve that population. You'll often see housing that, is affordable housing. That general question is then, well, affordable for whom?
So here's a question. Is affordable housing affordable? We looked at one of the many cities that struggle with this affordable housing shortage, Washington, D.C. We called around to some apartment complexes in D.C. that had affordable housing options listed and found that not all affordable housing comes as advertised. One building said that for a 1-bedroom for one person, the units were priced at $1,244 and you had to make a minimum of $41,000 to move in. After crunching some numbers, that exceeds a third of your income, and according to HUD, that's not affordable housing. And that wasn't the only complex that quoted misleading numbers. Although some of these affordable housing options can also be paired with a housing voucher from the government to offset costs, nothing in the world of affordable housing is guaranteed. But what about housing for not only the low income, but for the extremely low income? A report from DC's Inspector General Office published in September of 2021 shows that the city misused nearly $82 million of funding meant to provide affordable housing for DC's lowest income residents. The report also found instances of landlords overcharging for affordable housing, stating a landlord charged rents higher than allowed in 14 of 19 units. We reached out to the city's housing department with questions, but haven't gotten an answer. In the meantime, we decided to go out into DC and figure out what affordable housing looks like in the nation's capital.
You're across from a vacant school, you're a couple doors down from a slum landlord, and the new development is so out of reach that it's not normal.
That describes the scene across many US cities, including the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Like in many other major metro areas, the signs of gentrification are everywhere, putting affordable housing further out of reach for many. Here, a historically black community in a neighborhood known as Ivy City is fighting an ongoing battle with developers to bring the heart of the neighborhood back to life and give housing options to working-class residents. Newsy runs an organization called Empower DC. They work with low-income residents, organizing campaigns for social programs and greater access to affordable housing. They've got a few things in the works, starting with the reopening of the closed-down Cromell School.
We finally got the city to agree to make it a community center. Did you go here?
Yeah. I just wonder why they abandoned it.
Yeah.
That wasn't fair to the kids in this community.
You're right. Yep. Well, keep an eye on it. We're trying to bring it back.
Cromell was an all-black school that closed in the 70s. It was the centerpiece of the neighborhood and was used for things like community meetings and events. In recent years, the city supported a proposal to replace it with luxury housing. But last summer, a 40-year-old neighborhood effort won a major victory when the community was given the go-ahead to turn the old school into a multi-purpose community center. Parisa and their organization say another luxury housing complex would drive prices up while also removing crucial services for low-income folks. They do support new housing, but say it has to be within reach for the community that lives there.
So this would be considered what the city calls naturally occurring affordable housing, meaning it's older, it doesn't have amenities, it's more affordable. We need to preserve buildings like this. We also need to make sure that the conditions are good. A lot of times they're real rundown and have bad landlords. I don't know this one in particular, but there's several others here. And then they get flipped and they get turned into high-cost housing.
Why is affordable housing so scarce in DC? Why is it so hard to get a hold of affordable housing in the city?
It has not been the priority of the city. It's a policy decision. You know, the city has done really good at subsidizing for-profit development.
For what it's worth, DC city housing officials point to increased funding for affordable housing as proof of progress. Though when we reached out for details and to ask about a recent report showing misused funds totaling about $80 million, we didn't get a response. There's a need for extremely low-income housing in this area and across the city, but oftentimes when developers are tasked with building affordable housing, it doesn't quite pencil out or make financial sense for them. They say renting out homes at lower prices doesn't cover their costs. So where does that leave folks who get locked out of homes by soaring rent costs?
They stay with friends and family, which is, you know, of course, another stressor on families. They live beyond their means. Some are homeless. And some people with disabilities are sometimes kept in institutions because there is no affordable housing for them to come to.
Empower DC has worked to help get a small area plan approved for Ivy City. The aim is to ensure residents in Ivy City can have a say on what happens in their community, from additional green space to preserving and expanding affordable housing. And it's already making an impact. The city has halted development on a seafood company building that was going to be turned into 8 stories of housing, places that most residents in the area can't afford. Things were put on pause because of the small area plan. Newsy believes that a small area plan won't just give residents the opportunity to weigh in on development decisions in Ivy City, it'll also give the city an opportunity to do right by some of their most vulnerable residents.